This is the best of First and Last, the podcast, with Mike Golic Jr. and Robin Lundberg.
Good weekend of opening games of the NBA playoffs. The best game yesterday, the Bulls pulling off that upset over the Celtics, 106-102 to take a 1-0 series lead. And that idea of the most likely upset in the first round being the 8th seed in the Eastern Conference over the 1 seed, well, materializing a little bit.
It did, and it at least materialized in a really exciting way. We were talking before the show, with the exception of really 2 games. One of the very last game we saw last night, the hyped matchup between the 2 premier MVP candidates, and a Grizzlies-Spurs series that almost no one will probably pay attention to. The rest of the first-round games were really entertaining and the perfect deodorant for the stench of the end of the regular season.
You know, the old joke was always NBA TV series. The NBA TV series are clearly Washington and Atlanta, with the Wizards beating the Hawks yesterday, and the Grizzlies and the Spurs. The marquee game was last night, of course, Harden against Westbrook. The Rockets ran away with that. The Rockets are good, man. I think they got a good team. They're really well designed. You know, they've got some athletes who can also hit the 3-point shot and defend their position. Patrick Beverley, Trevor Ariza. Actually, Beverley outplayed Russell Westbrook last night, to me. They've got the shooters and Ryan Anderson and Eric Gordon. They've got another creator coming off the bench now in Lou Williams. And then they give the ball to James Harden, who has been marvelous all season. And Oklahoma City can't shoot the ball. So I do think Houston's a far superior team and actually the biggest threat to Golden State, if there is one, in the Western Conference. But you're right. As far as all the other games, other than those, sort of living up to the hype.
Exactly. And with Houston, and how much of the matchup between Russell Westbrook and James Harden that we all sort of look forward to and coveted really blinded us to the fact that, oh, by the way, we all knew coming off the regular season, Houston was a lot better team than Oklahoma City. I was sat there watching the end result of that game and realizing probably should have seen this coming, forgetting that Russell Westbrook and them struggled as a team as much as they did through certain stretches, especially when they played against the top-flight competition. And you mentioned Patrick Beverley. Really, I think, turned it on because it was a close game when he took that really hard screen from Steven Adams.
That was kind of a dirty screen, I think.
Absolutely blindsided, which I loved as someone who made a living borderline dirty through most of my athletic career. There was part of me that relished in that moment because there was a little something extra on that screen for everyone to see. But give Patrick Beverley a ton of credit. Clearly, that was a guy. He was that guy playing quarterback for his high school football team who probably said, I don't really feel like I get into the flow of the game before I get popped that one time. Because he got hit, he got back up, and he went off after that. It was a close game really until that point. And then they began to pull away, and Beverley was a huge reason why.
Yeah, he had a great game last night, 21 points. Their center rotation's a little underrated, I think, too, because they've got 2 separate guys who are both a little bit mobile, do different things. Clint Capella, that rim diver, and Nene can score the ball a little bit. But back to the Open, which was the Bulls over the Celtics. And you watched that game yesterday, and, of course, there's the tragedy that Isaiah Thomas had to deal with, which is basically incomprehensible. His performance, despite that, speaks for itself, and 33 points for Isaiah. But when you're looking at this specific series and how it goes forward, it doesn't feel like yesterday watching that game was much of an upset. It does feel like the Celtics have a real chance to go down in this series to Chicago.
It does, and when you look at a big part of the reason why, people are going to point to what happened on the glass. The Bulls out-rebounded the Celtics 53-36 and had 20 offensive boards, so 20 extra cracks at it, 20 extra possessions for them based off that. But that had been a pattern of behavior. When you look at the Bulls' 3 wins over the Celtics this season, including Sunday, they were out-rebounded. The Celtics were out-rebounded by the Bulls by 17, 19, and 20 boards respectively. So one of those things where we always talk about the postseason being different. Well, it's hard to discount what's clearly become a pattern with these 2 teams based on their meetings this year.
Well, the Bulls have a physical, experienced team that can D you up. I mean, obviously we know Dwayne Wade and what he's done throughout his career. Robin Lopez, one of the more unsung players in the league. Actually, it's hilarious, Knicks fans yesterday having to watch Tim Hardaway Jr. dunk on the Wizards, and then later in the day, the Bulls in crunch time are playing Jaren Grant and Robin Lopez, the 2 guys traded for Derrick Rose. But they've got those guys. The problem with the Bulls, construction-wise, had been their lack of shooting on the outside, the redundancies of having Rondo and Wade, and playing Bobby Portis and playing Grant, giving those guys those minutes down the stretch really opened things up a lot for them. Portis was 3 of 4 from 3, and Grant can penetrate and drive and dish a little bit. And Jimmy Butler's the best player in that series. So if you're going by that old rule of thumb of the team with the best player wins, then Chicago's going to win that series.
Yeah, 15 of his 30 points in the fourth quarter, the most points he's ever scored in a quarter in the playoffs. And we know how much we prorate the fourth quarter, so doing it in that big moment and giving his team that lift when it mattered the most and cementing what you just said, that I'm the best player on the court. I know I need to be that for this team if we're going to have the success that we want to now that we're in here, because they got in there as the 8th seed for a reason. They had struggled during the season in different stretches, but finding your groove and getting a matchup that certainly we talked about during the season favored you in a number of ways, and you continue to go out there and show why.
It's time for some Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Talk Wireless. Best phones, best networks, half the cost, and it'll come from Jimmy Butler about how locked in the Bulls were.
We were so locked in all week. We knew their stuff just like they knew ours, but we executed extremely well. We haven't done that all season, but this is the right time to do it. Everybody stepped up and did what was asked of them, and I think that's all you could do, especially on the road.
Straight Talk Wireless, nationwide coverage on America's largest and most dependable networks. You know, the playoffs are a very good antiseptic for the regular season. All that talk about how terrible the end of the NBA regular season was, well, the first games were extremely entertaining over the weekend, and it also shows you, look at the Bulls now. You forget all the turmoil they had earlier in the year. You get that one win to start the playoffs. You get that idea of, hey, the 8 seed could beat the 1 seed, and we all forget the Rondo rift with Wade and Butler after they criticized the young players on the team, and the young players on the team playing big minutes alongside Wade and Butler down the stretch to beat Boston.
It's another testament to that long NBA regular season we've been lamenting, where you can say, wow, it feels like that was a lifetime ago, because basically calendar-wise it probably was a lifetime ago at this point with how long the regular season has gone. But you're right, you got to the point now where you talk about the importance of the regular season. Well, the importance is that you have to do enough to get to this point. And now here we've got a lot of teams that are clearly locked in. We talk about effort plays. Before the show, JBT was telling us that the Celtics this year during the regular season had 7 jump balls over the course of the regular season and had 4 in the game last night. So it shows you the way everyone's attacking the ball right now. Everyone's making the extra effort plays that we associate with the playoffs, and it was very evident for anyone who just sat down and watched any number of the games we had go on this weekend, as that intensity got dialed up early on this time of year. And for all the blowouts we saw last year, at least for this first weekend of games, this first set of games, very interesting and compelling matchup. First
and last. The podcast.
The Warriors getting that marquee slot as they are the marquee team in the NBA. I think if we're going beyond individuals, and you get a collection of superstar individuals on said Warriors team, and an entertaining game against Portland, given that this is a juggernaut against a gnat, essentially. C.J. McCollum with the big game for the Trailblazers was really filling it up in the first half and wound up with 41 points. Damian Lillard got his a little bit as well. But the difference in this game was Draymond Green. He was unbelievable defensively. And if you want some sort of illustration of it, the statistics say when he was the primary defender, the opponents were 4 of 16 in the game. That's not good percentage-wise, including 0 of 6 in the fourth quarter.
And had a few of those stand up and pace around your living room, unsure of the meaning of life blocks in that game. Really, I mean, almost outdoing himself at every turn with plays like that for a guy that we know is undersized for the position traditionally, and we talk about in a lot of certain terms on this team that's full of superstars, full of unbelievably talented scorers. But again, the camp of people, and it comes up usually in the playoffs with Draymond, the camp of people that say, well, how could Steph be the argument? How could Steph be the MVP when he's not the most important player on his own team? Those people looked smart again and looked right last night, because Draymond was unequivocally that guy for Golden State. When they needed it the most, that lineup they put out there with it was him, it was Andre Iguodala, and that group. It was basically a defensive-oriented group in a time where they felt like they needed to ratchet up that intensity, all built around Draymond Green, who that's his identity. And that's what you need when you want to have that. We always hear that with the Cavaliers, they can flip that switch. Well, when you want to flip the switch, it has to be behind the effort of someone who builds their identity on that end of the floor. And that's what they've got in Draymond Green. Steve Kerr can look to Draymond when they need it and say, all right, we need you to actually go out there and flip that switch, not because it's something we know and believe that you might be able to do, but because that's who you are.
Draymond with 19 points, 12 boards, 9 assists, 5 blocks, 3 steals. Since blocks and steals became official in 73-74, no other player has all 5 of those numbers, hit all 5 of those numbers in a playoff game. And you're right, and that's the difference with the Warriors, right? We know they can score. We know the Warriors can put points on the board, but so can a lot of these teams. The Clippers were more offensively efficient down the stretch of the season. The Blazers can obviously score. We just mentioned McCollum and Damian Lillard, the Cavaliers. But the Warriors can lock you down. The Rockets, who I think are their primary threat in the West, the Warriors can lock you down better than any of those teams. Both on the perimeter, their guards are underrated defensively. I mean, a lot of those shots McCollum hit were tough ones, but especially with Draymond being the key guy behind that. And what impresses me the most about his defense is probably, as you mentioned, contesting the shots as a rim protector. Because, look, Draymond can go on the perimeter and play defense. And that's what makes him special defensively, is that he can defend on the perimeter and he can be your center. You know, he can defend on the interior. But what's physically impressive is he's not 7 feet tall. He's not 6'10". You know, he's 6'7". He's listed at. He doesn't have. I mean, he's got a long wingspan, but he doesn't have that freakish build where you sit there. This guy jumps out of the building, or this guy's arms never stop. Yet you see guys try to challenge him near the rim, and their shots are being altered because of the combination of his physicality, his effort, and his ability.
It is. It's not like, I mean, you look at his teammate, his counterpart in Kevin Durant, who they brought over, who we've lauded as becoming much more of a rim protector and using that freakish size and athleticism for his position to go out there and be effective in a vein where he probably should have been more effective from the start of his career based on the physical tools. Draymond has overcome that from the jump. He's made that through effort and an uncompromising belief in himself. And there are certain areas, there are certain instances, and you're always going to need a baseline of physical skill set to begin with. But there are certain instances, especially, I think basketball just as a sport, because of how fluid it is, because of even how positionless it is now, but that defensive back, wide receiver in football, where this uncompromising belief in yourself and this borderline arrogance in your own ability can elevate you to be an all-star caliber player for a guy that probably doesn't have an all-star caliber physical set of skills.
And as much as Draymond's switch can be flipped to the detriment of the Warriors, as we've seen, of course, we saw it throughout the last year's playoffs with the groin punching and eventually getting suspended in the NBA Finals. He's the only guy on that team who really brings that. I mean, you have David West coming off the bench who has been there, done that tough kind of guy. But Draymond brings that every team needs a little bit of crazy, right? You know,
oh, yeah.
He brings that to the table that the Warriors otherwise don't have.
I forget who said. Someone said that this weekend. I forget if it was Charles or one of the guys on that countdown show, but you need a crazy guy to go out there and win, and that is definitely their crazy guy. But in addition to having that crazy factor you can't account for, the Warriors also went back and showed, what did we talk about when they gave up a lot of the guys they sent out to get Kevin Durant, was the Warriors were going to sacrifice some of that depth that had been such a hallmark of the last 2 years of this team, and they put that back on display last night. You had Ian Clark out there in that same defensive lineup. You mentioned David West. JaVale McGee's continue to go out there and really perform well in stretches for this team. So they showed that they can throw a lot of guys out you there, and they might not be able to score at the same clip as that monster lineup of offensive talent that Golden State can trot out when they're starting. But they've got guys that understand their role on their team about as well as anyone, and maybe that's yet another reason why they're so successful, is because they get a bunch of guys that understand, all right, this is why I'm here, this is what I'm going to excel at. And when you've got a guy like Draymond, who again can be the shining example of that and saying, I know my lot in this, I'm going to do it at the utmost level, it trickles on down to everyone else.
And Steve Kerr talking about Draymond Green putting the battery in the back of the Warriors.
When you get that block at the apex of the rim, or of the player's elevation, and he's right at the rim, and you get a block like that, it energizes everybody. And I thought our fans were fantastic. Our players were fired up, and Draymond made a couple of just huge plays that got us going.
Yeah, he shouldn't be having 5 blocks, right? Draymond Green shouldn't be having 5 blocks, and you shouldn't have a guy who's able to do that at the rim and also able to pick guys up on the perimeter. I mean, you talk about positionless. There's really not a position that Draymond can't guard. He's not going to be out there guarding the elite point guards in the league. We understand that, but if it's a given possession, you're okay with it, right? So there's not a given possession where you're not okay with Draymond being on literally any player in the league.
And that's doing that on an individual basis. We know he's one of the big communicators for them on defense, basically being that quarterback for them. So the number of roles that he's comfortable finding his way into and then going out there and being the mouthpiece for the team, being that guy that we can understand is going to give us the real state of the union for a group that outside of that has a lot of really quiet superstars. For as much as we know Steph, he's not a guy that's going to go out there and really speak his mind. That's why earlier this year when Kevin Plank and all the Under Armour stuff went down, we were shocked to hear Steph's voice come out in that way, but KD's really largely been the same way. You look on down the list, Clay and the rest of those guys not really prone to coming out and speaking, so Draymond filling that role as well. He wears, quite literally, as we saw in this game, a lot of hats for this team.
Yeah, and they're very good. I mean,
spoiler alert, guys. This might be everything that Jeff Van Gundy predicted it could be.
I mean, you project forward, you could see them running the table. Now, again, I think Houston is the best built in the West. Maybe I'm going to pay for slandering the Spurs, and they sort of shift the paradigm because the Spurs have gone bigger this year, but I just worry about their guard play. Houston at least has the scoring. They've got some athletes. They've got mobile bigs where they're the most interesting to me in the West. Overall, still the most interesting is LeBron, the team that has LeBron against Golden State. But it's tough seeing anybody beating them 4 out of 7 games.
First and last.
George with it. At the top, double cover, blitz comes, gives it up to Miles. Miles out on the left. Miles rises, fires, misses at the horn. The Cavaliers hang on. They got the ball out of Paul George's hands. C.J. Miles had a shot, but he missed it. And Cleveland somehow hangs on to take the opener here at the Q.
I was asking for it. Again, I was trying to give it up and force them to scramble back to the open man so I can get it back. At that time, it's not enough seconds on the clock for them to try to double team again. And, CJ, took it upon himself. I'm confident with all my guys taking shots. That's not the issue. But in that situation right there, I got to get that.
That was the first game of playoffs. Very good game. Very entertaining, really, the Cavaliers being carried by the two guys that we're accustomed to, LeBron and Kyrie, doing the scoring. For them, Mike, LeBron is the Batmobile and Kyrie is the Batcycle, right? LeBron is the bruising force that is all-encompassing. It takes care of all these things, and Kyrie is the guy who gets into those smaller spaces.
Kyrie, especially the playoff version of Kyrie that's now started to show up in the last couple of years, is maybe the most entertaining player in the world. That guy offensively is so gifted and continues to remind us all the ways he can finish at the rack. But you're right, 89. They scored or assisted on 89 points between the two of them in a game where it seemed like no one could miss for a while. I mean, the Cavs were shooting, 70% from the field in the first half. It was an insane offensive output. It's just unfortunately matched by the same defensive effort and execution we've seen from them all season.
Now, the last shot, as you heard referenced by Paul George, I really didn't like his comments there. I liked, actually, his assessment of the play overall. He was pointing it out, discussing what took place. But when he said that I had to pull C.J. Miles aside, because I don't know if we had the full thing there, he said I had to pull him aside and talk to him and say, I've got to get that last shot. To me, you know what that is? It's insecurity, because it's saying what you think everybody wants to hear. That sort of Kobe mentality. And by the way, the Kobe Lakers were terrible down the stretch of games toward the end of his career because everybody knew it was Kobe or else offense. And if you watch that play, the double team comes up. They sort of it's a sneak double team. It's not shown at first, and then it's hard, and it comes up to the top, so it forces the ball out of Paul George's hands. By the time C.J. Miles has the ball in his hands, there's about 4 seconds left on the clock. So you're talking about a guy to expect him to either get you the ball back so you can take a crazy fling. He's an NBA vet. This is not a rookie who needs to be scolded. 4 seconds is 4 seconds on the clock. He's just trying to get the ball up on the rim at that point. And there's no player in the history of the NBA who deserves every last shot. It goes unspoken that Paul George is going to get the bulk of the final shots, or at least the possessions, right? He's going to get to control the possession and what takes place. We all understand that, and it's assumed. To me, it's just weak for him to come out and say it, especially given the way that play unfolded.
And I'm fine with you saying that because you're someone who your assessment of endgame situations has always been kind of consistent with this line of thinking. I'm interested how this goes over largely because, like you said, this is what people want to hear from their superstars. They want their guy to want the last shot. This is what was thrown at LeBron James for years, was him being too deferential in these moments. So to hear this out of Paul George, now the only problem is that you don't really see it matched. Like a lot of people say, all right, if you want that last shot, like find a way, because it was a sneak double team, I'm with you, but they saw exactly what was going to happen the possession before the Richard Jefferson foul that preceded that inbounds that led to that. They did the same exact thing to Paul George bringing the ball up the court. They brought that sneak double team. He moved it. They had a foul to give. Richard Jefferson ended up giving that on a blocking foul, and then they got to this last thing. So you knew exactly what was going to happen if you are the Pacers, and they did nothing to account for that.
Yeah, I have no problem with him wanting the last shot. Even if after the game he said, I wish I had gotten the ball back and got an opportunity to put it up, that would be fine. The idea, though, I had to take him aside and talk to him, that's got to be me in that situation. What situation are you watching? What situation was he present for there? Like, if you want it back right away, then fine. Know the double team's coming yourself. Pass him the ball and come aside for a dribble handoff and then get up a three. But the spot C.J. Miles was in, and again, this is not somebody who's a rookie. I don't know how many years he's played in the NBA, but he's like 30 years old. He's a vet at this point in the NBA, almost probably 10 years deep in his career. I think he might be more than 10 years deep in his career. Those guys have that clock in their head. He got the ball. He feels it, right? You feel it with 4 seconds ticking off, and he's just like, I got to get this up on the rim. And it's not like it was the worst shot in the world considering where they were, considering their original play didn't actually work and was blown up by the Cavs defensively.
Well, I mean, how many times do we make fun of college basketball for having end-of-game sequences where guys would get the ball in a situation and try and get it back to someone and they wouldn't even get a shot off? So C.J. Miles just trying to ensure that they had a chance, that they were able to get something up. And you talk about what situation is Paul George talking about. He's talking about the situation that he's 0 for 15 in his career with under 4 seconds left and a chance to tie or win in that moment. 0-4 in lifetime. So maybe not the guy you want taking the shot.
Here was Paul George's full assessment.
Lance was open, but that would have been a play that they were on. They almost was baiting me to throw that. Richard Jefferson was kind of cat and mousing it, and I saw that. Lance, I told Lance he had to flash up. Flash that or to that nail, and that would have been the ball game right there because Richard can't guard both of those, CJ and Lance, but he didn't do so. I gave it up, to soften him up and try to get it back. I talked to CJ about it. Situations like that, I got to get the last shot.
See, it's just the last comment there. Speaking of the last shot, everything else about that cut is great. Wonderful. Great description of what's going on. You understand what's taking place on the court. But I just feel that was condescending and demeaning of his teammates unnecessarily to make himself look good, to make himself look like, I wanted to be the guy to take the big shot. We understand. We understand that Paul George, the Cavs understood that Paul George was likely going to get the shot. Why do you think the double team? Hence the double team.
Everyone was in on that one. We understand it, and it is. I mean, and listening to that end description of there, he sounds like he's going like the coach from The Waterboy. He fakes the fake. He pretends to fake. They were trying to bait me into this pass. They wanted me to think that I knew, that I thought that it might happen, and then we got there.
What do you think of Paul George saying he has to have the last shot? 888-729-3776 on the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line, at Robin Lundberg, at M. Golic Jr. 57 on the 1-800-Flowers Twitter feed. Let's go to James in Philly. James, you're up first here on First and Last. Go ahead.
Hey guys, how you doing? Listen, I'm glad you guys are talking about this because that Paul George cut has rubbed me the wrong way all weekend. First of all, this. I understand that Paul George wanted to take the last shot. Fine. First of all, I don't. But if Miles tries to give the ball back to George, I don't know if there's enough time for him to get the shot off. First of all,
it'd just be a heave.
Right, exactly. It would have been a heave. Miles had he had an open look. He just missed it. For Paul George, to me, Robin, I don't think Paul George has the pedigree to talk the way he did. I'm sorry. He just doesn't. He's a very good player, Paul George, but if that's Kobe or Steph Curry or LeBron talking in that situation, fine. But I'm sorry. I don't think that Paul George has the pedigree to talk that way.
Well,
as Mike said, he's 0 for 15.
I don't want to hear that from anybody.
In situations like that.
You know, Steve Kerr, John Paxson, everybody can point to those guys. Kyrie, last year, the big shot in Game 7 of the Finals. We can go to the Warriors Championship. I promise you we'll see a big bucket by Andre Iguodala or somebody along those lines. That's basketball, right? That's what happens. If you're out on the floor, you have to be trusted to be able to make a play. We all get it. We all get it that the Stars control a lot of the possessions, and they're going to be the guys orchestrating most of those times until they're not. And if you're on the floor, you got to be ready to take the shot. And if you're a star player, you have to be willing to give the ball up in those spots. I just don't understand the point. To me, the point is, I like to bring up this analogy. Basically, it's a pro wrestler at an arena saying, hey, Philly, glad to be back, and cupping his ear. That's basically all that is. Paul George looking for the adulation after the loss by being the I want the last shot guy, knowing the culture that we've sort of created here.
Yeah, well, he's giving everyone exactly what they want. You're right, and so I'm glad to see that people have seen through it, but I wonder if that's the minority or if most people see that and got exactly what they want and are happy about it. But it's an interesting point about how we perceive the source of this, because there is part of me that thinks if LeBron James had come out and said it, and let's say it wasn't someone like Kyrie Irving, because I don't think we're saying C.J. Miles is the cash equivalent of Kyrie Irving for the Pacers roster, but if it had been
Channing Frye.
I would say if it had been Channing Frye taking that shot, or someone who's, because I don't know what kind of player C.J. Miles is, if that shot was something that's in his wheelhouse, that's something he does with a degree of regularity. But if it was something a little bit outside of someone's skill set, but because of the time and circumstance they took that shot, if LeBron James offers that same criticism and says, I need to get that ball back in my hands, I feel like we praise him, especially knowing LeBron's history in those moments. I feel like we tend to sway the other way and say, all right, good, he's finally taking ownership of that last moment the way we want him to.
But we know that that's not what LeBron does, right? We know that already, and it's now finally, I think the tide has shifted, and we've seen it turn to the point where he isn't getting criticized as much for passing to his open teammate. C.J. Miles is a guy who, is not a star-level player in the NBA by any means. He's one of those guys, though, that can catch fire and give you buckets in a given night. But again, it was the circumstances there. No one in the world believes that C.J. Miles is the guy who should be getting that shot with any degree of regularity for the Pacers. But he was on the floor, and he had the ball with 4 seconds left on the clock. What is he supposed to do?
First and last.
Mike, what if I told you that in a given year, one team would have its starting point guard skip a game, its owner publicly feud with a team legend, its team president publicly feud with the team's star player, and its promising young player turn against the team already? What team would that be that I was describing?
It sounds like some sort of video game monster that went horribly wrong in your franchise mode of NBA 2K16, but there's only one real-life factory of sadness that could manage to live up to that, and that's got to be the New York Knicks.
And we learned a lot about the New York Knicks, or more sadness about the New York Knicks. I had mentioned it even got worse. This started – let's do the timeline. This started on, I believe it was Friday. Was it Friday that Phil Jackson first came out and spoke? Yeah.
Yes.
Friday he came out and spoke and said the inevitable when it came to the end of Carmelo Anthony's possible tenure with the Knicks.
We've not been able to win with him on the court at this time, and I think the direction with our team is that he is a player that would be better off somewhere else and using his talent somewhere where he can win or chase that championship. Right now we need players that are really active, can play every single play, defensively and offensively. It's really important for us. We started to get some players on the floor that can do that, and that's the direction we have to go.
Look, I don't even mind the honesty, I guess, perhaps knowing what role you're playing, and Michelle Roberts, NBA Players Association, is upset about this, what he had to say about Carmelo. You figure out a more tactful way to deliver that message, but a lot of people feel that way, right, that this is inevitable. The little pot shots at the end there are what's especially unnecessary, and it feels as if Phil Jackson is scapegoating Carmelo. I've got news for Phil Jackson. He supposedly is the guy in charge, right? He has full autonomy. He's also the guy that re-signed Carmelo, and he's also the guy that gave him a no-trade clause. So that doesn't fly for me. You can't blame Carmelo as if you're some innocent bystander in that situation.
He wants guys that can be on the floor and play every play and give max effort, and he went out and signed Derrick Rose and Joakim Noah this offseason. Those were his marquee acquisitions into the year, two guys that couldn't be the poster for anything more opposite of that sentiment.
Yeah, and, if you want to get good at basketball, here's what you do. You go to the Knicks, and then you leave the Knicks. I mean, you mentioned those two guys, the guys that they acquired this offseason, the guys that they sent out were playing yesterday. Big-time minutes. Jaren Grant, who's young and on a team-friendly deal. Robin Lopez, not young, but on a team-friendly deal. Both guys, by the way, played well with Kristaps Porzingis, and they're gone. Tim Hardaway Jr., another young player who had a nice year this year, and it just seems like you have that happen every year. All the Knicks castaways wind up, when they get to a better culture, a better organization, and more defined roles, they start to thrive. Now, the one positive for the Knicks had been Kristaps Porzingis, and yeah, that's not going so well either at the moment. Here was Ian Begley, ESPN NBA Knicks reporter, on Kristaps Porzingis skipping the Knicks exit meetings.
He should have an immense amount of concern, because this is your franchise player. You think this is a guy who, if he reaches his potential, which the Knicks organization believes he can and will, is a player you can build around, and you can build a winning team around. And if you look at this Knicks roster, this is Kristaps Porzingis is the best thing to happen to this club, not only this season, but in several seasons. And I think that they should really pay attention to what's happening here and do what they can to sell Kristaps on a vision for the future here and kind of calm him down regarding his frustration with the club.
And, that speaks volumes, Mike, because we had lauded Kristaps Porzingis for his competitiveness, his willingness to play in New York, his desire to play in New York, and we're already at this point?
Seems a little early for this kind of trouble, but not all that surprising when you consider all the rest of the stuff that we've mentioned, the way that this has gone for the Knicks, considering who's at the helm. What's the famous remember the Titans quote? Attitude reflects leadership, and right now you've got the leadership completely void, and it leaves room for a lot of stuff like this. Like, we need to segment you, because speaking of Kristaps Porzingis and other things that bleed into where the battle lines are kind of drawn here, we need a segment called Double Tap, where we just track the likes of NBA and professional athletes on different social media outlets, because Carmelo Anthony went on Instagram like he always does and gave us a nice Stame M70 quote with the picture of Leonardo DiCaprio sitting there. Really is the reaction to the press conference that Kristaps Porzingis gave the double tap to. So going out there and giving that social media support for his teammates in the most millennial way possible, all while skipping out on his obligation to the Knicks there, is sort of a big you-know-what to Phil Jackson.
Yeah, you could take it as petulance. I think it was more a statement that what's going on right now is not okay. These players, Kristaps obviously doesn't like the way Carmelo's been treated. Remember, that was a storyline that was constant throughout the year that they were dealing with in the locker room, too. And then there's reports that Phil is continuing to harp on the triangle and continuing to harp on the reverse pivots, that he's sending internal emails out there about reverse pivots. The level of arrogance from that guy is astounding, given the lack of accomplishment in his position right now. The team is 80-166 under his stewardship. He apparently also said that threes are a cheap way to score, so he's discouraged Kristaps Porzingis from taking them. Like, talk about doing whatever you can to set your legacy ablaze, because Phil Jackson is a legendary coach. I'm never going to take that away from him. But now his follies, his failures as an executive are rivaling his triumphs as a head coach, which is hard to do. And it's hard for the Knicks to continue to do this, to get another big name past the prime, another mess, to lead the league in dysfunction every year. They really are remarkable. And I say it without hesitation, and I say it, this gives me no joy. I don't want this to be true because as an NBA fan, as someone who lives in the New York area, I would love for the Knicks to thrive, but they are, without a doubt, all things considered, the worst organization in sports.
You have to start to think it's intentional now, right? Like maybe this was Phil's parting gift to Jeannie. It's like, all right, listen, I understand that you guys are going through some tough times out in L.A. That team's not going to be very good. I got you. That the meme that's been going around right now, things aren't going out right now. We're the Lakers. Hold my beer. The Knicks have got you on this one. We'll take care of this, and I will go and absolutely torpedo this organization at every single turn.
And Knicks fans are now juggling beers like Red Panda juggles plates to deal with everything that's going on with their fandom.
First and last, the podcast.
I had a bunch of people tweet at me and brag to me that the Raptors lost that game because I've said if any team's going to beat Cleveland in the East, it's the Raptors, and that people are sleeping on the Raptors a little bit. Let me give a little notice. The Raptors always lose game one. I knew that to be true, and then the guys looked up the stat before the show. What's the exact stat, guys, about the Raptors? Do we have that?
They have not won game one of a playoff series since the first term of the George W. Bush administration. I believe the exact year was 2001.
Uh-huh. So Joshua Tree by U2 was probably out at the time that last happened, right? So basically that's some of that context, but it changes nothing about Giannis, who was awesome in that game. And really, Mike, if you were to take all the NBA, wipe all the rosters clean, and you start from scratch with a redraft, I'm not so sure he's not the top overall pick.
It got me to thinking about it this weekend because for him, this is the best playoff performance we'd seen out of him. 28 points, 8 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 steals, threw a block in there. Just the box stuffing performance that we're used to seeing out of him. It got me to thinking, all right, for a guy this talented, we know the physical skill set's been there. We've marveled at him. We call him the Greek Freak because he is a freak and also because it's really hard to pronounce his name. But we've marveled at that skill set for a while. He's starting to put it together more and more as a complete player. It's done it to the point where the Bucks are in the playoffs largely because of his effort. And I wonder what the timeline is now where we start considering him as a serious MVP candidate coming up here soon, when he's seriously going to challenge for this award, because it seems like that day is coming sooner than later.
Well, he would have been an MVP candidate. His season this year was MVP worthy in a normal year. If we didn't have these like freakish years from Harden and Westbrook, and then of course you always have LeBron around, and the Bucks would have to probably rise a little bit more in the standings. They're not that far away, though. Give them another creative scorer, and they're in business. The thing that separates him, I mean, you see what he can do defensively, but it's his skill and size. That he's 6'11" with an endless wingspan. He's an awesome athlete, but he can put the ball on the floor. He's got good court vision. He can pass and do all that stuff. When he adds the 3-point shot to that arsenal, that's it. That's game over. And he's only 22 years old.
That's the scary part. It's sort of a lot like, because of the measurables, a lot like what we've seen out of Kevin Durant, where he came in with such an otherworldly skill set. And for Kevin Durant, it's been being able to put it on the floor now as well as he has in recent years that's really elevating him to a different status. You're right, when Giannis adds that outside shot, because I think he's even more athletic than Kevin Durant, we've seen in a lot of instances. And to be that physically gifted, you start to wonder, too, we're talking, you basically get 7 years with one of the guys that you bring in as a young player in the NBA. And then it's, can Milwaukee do the things necessary? Can they bring in enough help for him? Can they give him enough reason to stay? Now, I think he's 4 years in at this point to his NBA, or he's 3 years into his NBA career. So in the next 3 or 4 years, can they do enough there? Can they basically do what we saw Cleveland unable to do the first time around with LeBron James, and bring in enough help for him to not be lured to greener pastures?
Milwaukee, I always had a running joke where it's a place a team is likely to be upset a lot of times during the regular season on the road, because nobody's getting hyped to play in Milwaukee. It feels so nondescript. Everything about them feels dull. but he has injected an energy there. Jason Kidd has proven himself now, I think, as a head coach as well. I know they had some shakeups in management there. I think, if they surround him with the proper team, he's the kind of player that's going to bring people to the franchise, right? He's exciting to watch. The Raptors, who are now 1-11 all-time in playoff game ones, and have lost their last 9, by the way, including last year to the Cavs in the Eastern Conference Finals, they were sort of a joke franchise for a while, and now, part of it's unique because they're in Canada, but they have one of the best home courts, one of the best crowds that I can imagine in the entire NBA. I don't know if that's not possible to happen in Milwaukee, right, where you build a constant winning team, and because Giannis is so captivating, I mean, the two things that have kept him from superstardom so far, I believe, are, one, playing in Milwaukee, and two, that his name is tough to pronounce. Both of his names are tough to pronounce. Once you get Antetokounmpo down, you forget that the G is silent in his first name. Real G's moving silence like lasagna, right?
Yeah, sure. But no, we need to do for him what we did with Mike Stanton for a while. I know he's gone back to Giancarlo now and playing into the area, but going by Mike, I think, really helped him early on in all this. So maybe we just need to call him Mike Antetokounmpo.
That's it. Switch it. Carl. Good to see you, Carl.
Exactly. It could go a long way, and if that happens along the line, and he really takes off and blows up and becomes marketable and ascends to NBA superstardom, I'll take my 2%.
Now he will be eventually competing for an NBA MVP. The two guys who seems like are competing for the NBA MVP this year went at it last night. My idea has been suspend the MVP trophy above the court. Well, if Game 1 was any indication, Harden would be the guy to snatch that. He was marvelous last night. I noticed a lot from James Harden playing defense, but also making passes that weren't for assists. Unselfish passes in transition to advance the basketball. Just winning plays from him last night. And he got a lot of help from his teammates. The Rockets are a very well-designed and well-constructed team. Harden's a guy who needs to play with the ball in his hands, so they surrounded him with skilled guys who don't need to play with the ball in his hands, and a coach in Mike D'Antoni whose offense calls for one guy to dominate the ball. And you look at the way that team is designed. They've got some athletes who can do both things in Ariza and Beverly. They got shooters in Anderson and Gordon. They got another creator in Lou Williams. And they got mobile bigs who give you different looks in Capella and Nene. I was impressed by Houston last night. I've been impressed by them all season. And they really, really ran away and hid from the Oklahoma City Thunder, who struggle from a couple of ailments. They can't shoot the ball. And when Russell Westbrook is bad, as he was last night, and when he's outplayed by Patrick Beverly, they're not going to have any chance at all in this series.
Yeah, I was impressed by Patrick Beverly because that guy took a shot and kept it moving. Steven Adams set the pick heard around the world last night that tried to shatter Patrick Beverly's existence. And right after that, it got to the moment where Patrick Beverly stayed down. You thought they were going to take him out of the game, and he pulled the football player move and waved him off, said, "I'm good," stayed in the game, and proceeded to give Oklahoma City buckets at a point in the game where it was still a 2 or 3 point game then. It was close, and that was really the changing point. After that, I heard Shaq and Charles saying after, that was probably not the place to set that kind of tone and really poke the bear. But instead, Patrick Beverly went out, responded in a big way, and gave that team a lift and absolutely began drumming them. And it made me remember that as much as we wanted to hype this up about the MVP matchup and these two guys going at it, great players we've seen all year with unbelievable historic type seasons, especially on offense, that Houston was actually one of the teams we were talking about as a legit title contender, and no one ever mistook Oklahoma City for that. And that disparity on the court showed up in a big way after that moment.
I think Houston's probably the biggest threat to Golden State in the West, but we talked a little bit earlier in the show about what Draymond Green brings to Golden State. He's just unbelievable defensively, and you saw that stand out in their win over Portland yesterday. Patrick Beverly, he's a different type of player, totally. He's playing point guard position, but that's what he does for Houston. He is their Draymond Green.
All right, Robin, I just thought of this idea. I need to circle back to the Giannis Antetokounmpo thing for a second.
Okay.
I think we can really help this guy, and I think I know exactly how. Now, I joked about making his name Mike, like Giancarlo Stanton's name was Mike for a while.
Yeah.
We change his first and last name because he needs help on both, and we name him with the blessing of the original. We name him Mike Will.
Mike Will made it?
so that every time he makes a shot, you can have that drop in the arena. He'll get the allure of the hip-hop audience. He'll capture a younger group. I really think that can get him a groundswell of support and be the basis for an MVP campaign, the likes of which we've never seen.
First and last.
Chris Paul off a Jordan pick to the right. 15 seconds left. Right hand floater to tie. He does. 95 all. Jazz don't call a timeout. Joe Johnson comes to the front court. Gets a pick from Ingles. 7 seconds left. High game. Joe Johnson working Jamal Crawford. 3 seconds. 2, 1 for the win. Yes! 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 Joe Johnson saves again!
All of those yeses, courtesy of 97.5 The Zone. Everyone loves a good end-of-game call, but it's completely topped. It's completely owned by far my favorite sound coming off the weekend, which is an unhinged Doc Rivers. After that game, that final sequence, that soul-crushing moment, Doc Rivers steps up to the mic at the post-game press conference, basically wearing the perfect look of 1950 or 1920s film noir guy, tie unbuttoned, glass of scotch deep, probably a cigarette offhand in the screen, completely disheveled, and then a reporter decides to try him, and the results may vary.
Doug, when Chris has a lane to the basket and he goes for a quick two, I mean, it sets up the opportunity. I mean, what's the philosophy on that? Is it, do you wait and say wave off an easy attack at the basket? Or in other words, he could have held up and tried to run the clock down to the final. You know, when you were down two,
who would do that? Like, why would you ever do that?
Like to maybe like 5 seconds. You know,
so
enough
if you
time
miss,
for an offensive.
the game's over.
Right. Well, no, like
that
5
makes
seconds.
no sense.
Right. I'm just asking.
No, that is like the dumbest thing I've ever heard. When you're down two,
right.
you try to score.
Exactly.
And then you put it on you don't wait.
You rely on your defense.
You score.
As quickly as you can, however
if you can score in 1 second, you score.
Gotcha.
Yeah, you always do that.
All right.
And if you can find another coach to tell you different, I want to meet him.
Robin, you've actually been in these settings. Where did it all go so wrong for your man? Because I could hear the sound of his hamstrings erupting off the bone in that back pedal.
Well, I'm not one of those people who believes in the mantra that there are no stupid questions. I mean, that's a stupid question because Doc Rivers answered it correctly. I mean, maybe he could have not said, that is by far we're all dumber having heard it, do the whole Billy Madison refrain. But when you're dealing with that specific situation he's talking about, Chris Paul scores and ties the ball game. If he missed and they got the ball, you still have a chance to foul, and they miss free throws, and you go back and you extend the game. If you run the clock down and he misses, the game is over. If you run the clock down and you even if he makes it, you're just going to overtime on a 2-point situation. But when you are behind, you try to score as quickly as possible. Doc Rivers is right. The guy I feel for in that spot is Chris Paul, because he made the bucket. And Chris Paul, to me, is one of the 5 best point guards of all time. The best combination of perimeter defense, shooting, scoring ability, and setting up teammates maybe that's ever been in one package. And he seems to be snake-bitten in the playoffs. I mean, the Clippers' real problem is they're starting Luke Baamute at the 3 position, and they're asking Jamal Crawford to guard guys at the end of games. But Chris Paul, he did it. He tied it. He hit the big shot. And then, no, it's taken right away a second later by Joe Johnson, who's been making game-winning buckets for, it feels like 20 years now.
It feels bad to say, but you don't want to call it someone's lot in life, but that seems to be, like you said, perfectly emblematic of what we've seen from Chris Paul's career, which is really good, but just not quite good enough.
Now, the good news, I guess, you never want to say this is good news, but for the Clippers going forward in the series is right at the beginning of that game, Rudy Gobert, who might be the best center in the NBA. I actually think this is a matchup of the 2 best centers in Gobert and DeAndre Jordan. Hyperextended his knee and suffered a bone bruise. He missed the remainder of that game. Jazz were still able to pull out the win. His status for the rest of the series is iffy. If he doesn't return, I think the Clippers win this series. But once you get that 1-0 lead, I mean, that's a big win for Utah in the context especially of Gobert's injury.
Well, and knowing that they lost him 17 seconds into that game. So they won that game completely without him factoring into it at all. And you hear that injury, it sounds eerily reminiscent of what happened with Kevin Durant.
Yeah, it was similar, and those guys are, tall, lanky guys as well, which makes unfortunately, like their legs an awkward target. Somebody's falling. I mean, they're susceptible to that through no fault of their own.
Yeah, it's a lot of surface area for it to happen, but more importantly, it's also difficult for guys with that much size and length to come back quickly from something like that as opposed to their smaller counterpart where all of those levers don't have as much torque put on them. So it's going to be, I think it's very unlikely that we see him again this series, which for what you said is very unfortunate knowing that we're one more marquee player removed from the equation.
First and last, Robin Lundberg, Mike Golic Jr. here on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app, 888-729-3776, at Robin Lundberg, at M. Golic Jr. 57 on Twitter. Of course, we take you up until Mike and Mike every Monday through Friday. Mike and Mike going to have plenty of NBA playoff coverage, as we will continue to give you plenty of NBA playoff coverage. But I feel like this is a very Mike and Mikey kind of conversation. You gravitated toward my Twitter feed yesterday and weighed in on this. Why can't you have ice cream before you have your meal? What's the logic or the actual reason behind that?
The society wants to put shackles on otherwise happy people and ruin their lives. Now, I'm with you on this one in principle, 100%. Like, eat ice cream whenever you want, get it how you live. But I can understand from a practical standpoint why it doesn't happen with any degree of regularity, because you always hear you don't want to fill up on dessert. That's why your parents traditionally made you wait, because the idea is that I'm going to eat so much of that ice cream, I'm going to have no room for the food that actually has nutritional value, and thus I put myself in a bad spot.
Well, look, ice cream's not very filling, and you don't enjoy ice cream as much if you're totally stuffed. Beside the point is, we're talking about a 2.5-year-old, my son Raj, yesterday, who, let's be honest, I mean, you're not always promised that he's going to eat the way you want him to eat in dining scenarios. He's going to eat when he's hungry, and we'll take care of it. He'll eat. But I made a promise to him. I gave him my word. We were out at the playground, and I told him it was a hot day. You know, if he was ready to leave the playground, I'd take him for ice cream. But the ice cream place was in the opposite direction of the brunch place we had to go for Easter brunch with my wife and my sister-in-law. So we wind up going to the restaurant, and I'm just thinking, I'll order him ice cream at the restaurant. We walk into the restaurant, sit down. I say, I'll have the Eggs Benedict, and this young man will have a scoop of vanilla ice cream. And the waitress was like, he'll have ice cream before his meal? And I was like, yes, he will have ice cream before his meal. And, I didn't notice it as this was going on, but she seemed to have a fundamental disagreement there, and she didn't bring out his ice cream until everybody else was done with their food. And he's sitting there going, hey, what's going on here? You promised me ice cream, and my ice cream's not here. I don't want this bread.
See, she's making you look bad in that moment. Because she's going out here and, making a clear parenting decision for your son, which I have the utmost of an issue with, but she's also just depriving him of happiness. Like, food and normal food is a preamble to dessert in life. It's a preamble to what we all really want. And in this unique standpoint, because usually you and I are on the opposite sides of the aisle when it comes to food, we both get to stand together arm in arm on the side of justice and on the side of right, because you're absolutely right. There's no reason why Raj should have been made to wait any longer than anyone else did for the food that he wanted to consume at that time.
Thank you for listening to the First and Last podcast. You can listen and subscribe to all ESPN podcasts in the Listen tab of the ESPN app. First and Last.